All right. The disembodied voice is telling me that the meeting is now being recorded. So welcome everyone. Happy National Disability Employment Awareness Month, October. And wanted to welcome you to our celebration of that with a panel titled "Everything You Know About Disability Inclusion is Wrong." So hopefully you got the and so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Miles Wallace. He is one of Disability Insight Texas' board members, and he's going to be moderating the panel today. So Miles, take it away.
Hey, Aaron, I had a quick question for you. Who the heck came up with the idea of insulting our whole audience and saying that everything you know about disability inclusion is wrong? What's up with that? Like, what's going on
I believe
there?
that was you.
Oh.
So I know I got a lot of positive feedback on that. I think most people got the kind of tongue-in-cheek nature of that. So
Well,
appreciate.
and let's just kind of lay the groundwork here, guys. That's a bit of a joke and everything. Really, what we want to do here is we kind of want to level the playing field, and we want to make sure that everybody feels welcome to share their voice, and also everybody kind of approaches it with a fresh set of eyes. My goal here today is to bring in a panel of experts to talk with y'all, and really kind of let's get down to real talk. Let's kind of break down some of the preconceptions that we may have, and let's talk about, what's going wrong with disability inclusion and how can we make it right. This is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. I'm really excited about that. Here at Peak Performers, we are a nonprofit staffing and recruiting agency, and we put about 1,400 people to work last year, and about 85% of them had a disability of some kind. So this month couldn't be more near and dear to our hearts, as well as this topic couldn't be more near and dear to our hearts, because we are really, really passionate about hiring people with disabilities. Because any of you that are on the call right now that yourself have a disability, you know that sometimes it might be visible and obvious, such as I'm in a wheelchair, or I'm blind, or maybe I have motor ability issues, but sometimes it's also invisible too. So folks with depression or anxiety, or so folks that might have ADHD or dyslexia, or somebody that comes to us that has PTSD or multiple sclerosis. So disability is very diverse. Disability has many facets to it. And the reality of it is that the more that we can make an inclusive workplace for people with disabilities, the more we can make it an inclusive workplace in general. So that's why I'm really excited to talk about this particular topic. By the way, before we get too far going in, I'm actually borrowing from Chris Mitchell, one of our panelists here, and we're going to do a brief introduction describing ourselves and also where we're currently sitting right now. So I am a Caucasian male, and I have blue eyes. I'm wearing a white shirt, and I'm sitting in a blue room. And my name is Miles Wallace from Peak Performers. Kate, would you mind going next?
Sure. I am Kate, and my name is Kate, and I am a young Indian Asian woman in her 30s with long dark hair and a black dress on.
Awesome. And Dylan, would you mind going?
Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon for some people that are tuning anywhere virtually. My name is Dylan Rafferty. I currently am here in Houston, but I'm originally from Plano, Texas. But I am a short white male and wearing almost a buzz cut, but I have a blue shirt, polo Ralph Lauren shirt, and pleasure to be here.
And Chris, would you mind finishing up it up here?
Be glad to. My name is Chris Mitchell. I'm coming to you from Webb City, Missouri, which is near Joplin, southeast corner of the state of Missouri. I am a Caucasian male with short gray hair. That does not mean I'm old. It means I'm experienced. I'm wearing a blue polo shirt, glasses, and I have blue eyes. And no one did this, but I'm going to point it out. I have a virtual background behind me, which is blue with my company name over my shoulder.
Awesome. And real quick, the reason that we did that is for folks that might have visual disabilities that might not be able to see the screen right now. What we're doing is we're describing ourselves as well as our environments in order to try to be as inclusive as possible. And I thought that that was a really great way, and something personally that in a lot of my meetings that I want to try to do more often right here. But I want to take this time to really thank Dylan, Kate, and Chris for all coming on. I'm going to do quick introductions right here. Dylan, starting with you, I gotta embarrass you just a little bit, sir. So Dylan is an award-winning disability rights advocate and entrepreneur. Dylan has advocated at the local and state level for disability inclusion, including work with the Governor's Committee on People with Disabilities and also founding the North Texas Disability Chamber. He also recently was giving the Plano's Rising Star Award. Dylan works as a donor relations manager for Robotics Education and Competition Foundation. Dylan, thank you. Really excited to have you on here. All right, Chris, you're next. Chris is a great podcast. He is the founder and CEO of Hashtag Define Yourself. In his podcast, Successful and Disabled, Chris interviews professionals with disabilities to talk about their journey through the work world while living with their disability. Full of wit, humor, and real talk, Chris's podcast is a must listen that normalizes disability disclosure and what it means to be a working professional with disability. And Chris, actually, you wanted me to specifically point out that you were yourself was self-disclosed as disabled, right?
Yes, I'm visually impaired. So if anybody sends a text message to me in the chat, I won't be reading it today. So I'm not ignoring you. I just don't see that well enough to read them.
Thank you, Chris. And finally, Kate is an up-and-coming Austin local consultant, spokesperson, and future author advocating for people with non-apparent disabilities. She is the director of inclusion and engagement at Open Source OD, an organization focused on emerging organizational development professionals. A passionate and soft-spoken professional, Kate brings hands-on experience working with C-suite and frontline employees. Her consulting work focuses on talking with companies about why they should be hiring more people with disabilities and how they can make their places more inclusive, as well as navigating difficult conversations. Kate, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
All
Happy
right.
National Disabilities Awareness Month.
Happy National Disability. I'm sorry. I get this one is a bit of a tongue twister for me. I don't know about y'all, but National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So for those of you looking up online, it's going to be hashtag NDEMA, typically followed by 2022. But you can find a lot of really great content if you look for that. So guys and gals, I wanted to bring you all in today to talk a little bit more about disability inclusion. And the first question that I would have for the panel is that many people assume that disability inclusion in the workplace is like flicking on a light switch. I like to joke that it's you are inclusively ever after, right? What I generally find is that it couldn't be further from the truth, and that it's much more of a gradual process. So I guess my question to the panel would be, what steps have you personally seen companies taking towards being more inclusive? Where are they at right now? And what do they still need to do? Dylan, if you want to kick this one off, sir.
Okay, all right, well, I'll do it. I think the biggest thing that companies are doing today is, the diversity, equity, and inclusion market in our companies in not only Texas, but everywhere else, has become more of a movement, and they're making incredible progress over the last several years, but significantly in the last couple of years, especially with the whole pandemic and the virtual platform. More people are taking a more initiative to provide accessibility to a wide range of audiences. I think the biggest challenge that a lot of companies are looking for is a partner to, whether it's individuals, whether they're consultants, or whether it's a nonprofit, or even a chamber. I think that is important, that companies start investing in partners that could not only educate them, but also invest in them in making sure that, disability inclusion is top of mind. Unfortunately, a lot of companies start with somebody within their internal organization that are persons with disabilities, and it's just, it's a good thing, but I think we need to not only look at internally, but also look at externally of stakeholders that they might serve within their respective communities.
Thanks, Dylan. What would you add, Chris and Kate?
Kate, do you want to go first, or otherwise I will? I'm going to take your silence as I can go first. Okay. What I like to add is basically what I've been seeing is from COVID, which Dylan touched upon a moment ago. COVID has forced a lot of companies to look into work from home, remote work, which has been a boom, in my opinion, for the disabled community, where disabled people can work in a workforce from their home when other situations like maybe public transportation, accommodations in the workplace is not conducive for them to actually go into an office. So not mitigating the horrible loss of life from COVID, it has been a blessing for the disabled community and an opportunity for us to work with technologies like Microsoft Teams, Zoom meetings, etc. A lot of disabled people have an opportunity to enter the workforce. Now, one thing I kind of like to tack onto this as far as what businesses can do to attract people from the disabled community, a community of people, many who want to be productive members of our society, who want to work and find barriers, is to be more welcoming. And I would recommend making sure on job postings you would mention that accommodations are available upon request before the interview. So that's a message to the people in the disabled community, my community, that hey, they're willing to work with me. That if I need an interpreter or something, they can provide that for me if I just give them a heads up on that. And making websites accessible, because the best way to get people to know your company is inclusive outside of the company to recruit people in is to demonstrate it online, because that's where most people are looking for jobs now. It's on the internet.
I couldn't agree more. And honestly, like the work from home is such a huge piece of it. It's important to point out that it's opened the door to so many people with disabilities, especially if they have motor disabilities, or especially if they have a perfect accommodation set up at home. But at the same time, there's also a lot of people with disabilities that want to go into the workplace. They want to be part of the integrated work environment. So it's really important for companies to kind of see both sides. Kate, what do you got to add?
Yeah, and I apologize for earlier as my microphone was mute. But what I was thinking, both Dylan and Chris covered, mentioning the pandemic, and basically, what I think companies are doing well at is acknowledging the fact that, pre-COVID barriers existed, and now that we're going back into the workforce and back into offices, they need to provide accommodations for things that maybe really weren't a conversation or weren't a talking point before. And even the fact that people may have developed disabilities during that 2-year time that they didn't have before. And now that they're re-entering the workforce, maybe they're having to ask for accommodations that they didn't need before. So I think, what companies are doing well is that they're starting to change their culture and acknowledging that, and trying to be more DE&I inclusive. But what I think they can be doing better, and Chris touched on this, is like during the talent acquisition part, is driving home a safe space and creating an environment that makes it safe to bring up those topics that can be uncomfortable for people. It puts employees and candidates in a vulnerable position. And so I think it's time for them to be a little more proactive in how they navigate these conversations. And so, that's on the early side of the recruiting process. But then, once we get people in the door, it's being more nurturing, and I think just more emotionally intelligent about providing, creating access to people who are integrating back into the workforce, but also like acknowledging, things are going to be a little different, but that's okay, because we're still going to keep the ball rolling. Everyone has a job to do, and it doesn't need to be, a thing. It doesn't need to be a big deal. It should just be a quick conversation, removing those barriers and letting them, people who identify with a disability enter the workforce freely and without it being an uncomfortable situation for them.
Okay, you bring up a fantastic point, and that is so many people during the pandemic might have acquired a disability, or they might have had a pre-existing disability exacerbated to the point where they need special accommodations. Now, we've had a lot of focus recently about mental health, but also, it's important to point out that if you a person that is autoimmune compromised, the last 3 years have been very difficult for you. Like it's been, and you are still finding yourself probably in a position of a lot of fears. So it's something that's really important for employees to keep in mind. The other thing that I would point out too is that disability is a bit of a moving target sometimes. It is something that will change and actually grows and adapts with our society as we go through. For example, the most recent thing is that long COVID is oftentimes being acknowledged as a disability. And when you look at the definition of a disability, there's not a comprehensive list that lists every single condition. And that's intentional on the part of the ADA. That's meant to be as inclusive as possible to as many people as possible. And that's really what's important right there, right? All right, next question. I wanted to ask, hey, so I've often found that well-meaning coworkers and bosses can sometimes make the biggest blunders around disability inclusion. So could you share with me the things that people have said or done around you? And in retrospect, how might they have said something or behaved a little bit differently that would have been a little bit more inclusive? Kate, would you mind starting this one off?
Yeah, I know last year I experienced just a different dynamic with my work group. And this was in a new position that I started. And I think it was just they felt like they were walking on eggshells with me and they just didn't know how to include me in certain spaces. And so instead, they just didn't include me at all. And so that type of shutout and rejection just continued on throughout my tenure in that position. And it just created, it was just hard to bond with your employment with your peers. And so, sometimes I would have to advocate for myself and kind of nudge my way in, but, there was also my own feelings of insecurity that I had to navigate because my disabilities are non-apparent. And so, I still think about those times and just kind of what it would look differently. And I think just, needing to be assertive in those moments. And while I don't think it shouldn't be necessary for me to have to put my personal, health out there, I think it would be better for like if people are on the fence about how to include somebody, just ask, rather than just ignoring or trying to sweep it under the rug. Just ask. We're very open to expressing ourselves. We're probably more in tune with our wants and needs. And so people shouldn't feel like they need to walk on eggshells when they're trying to include us or figure out, like, is this going to be traumatizing, triggering? Is this going to be awkward? Do they feel like, we're babying them? Like, honestly, it's just a quick conversation. Hey, are you okay this? Or, hey, what would you like to do? And make it an open-ended question so then we can say what we're comfortable with.
Kate, thank you. And that's a very human answer. And that's a really human approach to take too. It all starts with empathy. It all starts with listening and, having good conversations with people. There is no quick fix to disability inclusion. It's not a policy change. I mean, it starts, policy definitely has a big part of it, but a lot of it comes down to the individual conversations that you have with other human beings in your workspace. Chris, what would you add?
All right, I'd like to share an experience I had many, many years ago. That's why I'm experienced and not old. I was working at a job at a community college as a assistant in a computer lab, and I was working with a particular student who was totally blind. And as I mentioned, I'm low vision, been low vision all my life. And I heard from the student, who was also a friend of mine off campus, that the instructor for that lab had changed some of the grades on his work because I had made some mistakes in what I was doing, tutoring him and working with him in the lab. I was very hurt by that, not from the student aspect, but by my superior, the instructor for that lab, not coming to me directly and talking to me about the mistakes that I had made. I take what I do very seriously and I strive to do my best at what I do. And I felt it was poorly handled. One, I guess after hearing that, I did kind of withdraw and retreat and was embarrassed. And I probably should have approached her. In hindsight, I do own that part of it. She did know that I was visually impaired, but I wish he would have came to me and had said, you've been making some mistakes, pointed them out, and said, how can we prevent this, or how can I help you do your job better? And that's one thing I think needs to be done within companies. Instead of coming harsh down on a person, whether they're disabled or not, instead of coming down like you're making mistakes, this has got to end. Ask your employee, ask your team member or your coworkers, how can I help you? And because that's going to be the kind of environment that's going to help them thrive, you thrive, and your business thrive and succeed.
That's really important kind of things that you added. So thank you for sharing that. I think that it's really critical for all employers to be thinking about it. Hey, people with disabilities coming and working to your workforce, they're not seeking special treatment. What they're looking for is they're looking to be treated the same as every other employee in the workforce. And hey, part of that means that if we screw up, or if we require feedback or coaching on a particular situation, give that to us. It's really important so that we can continue to develop. And like Kate said, let's not walk on eggshells. That's not helpful. That's not conducive. I like to tell people that if you're working around people in the workplace, period, but especially if you are working around people with disabilities, you're probably going to say or do the wrong thing. I know that I have before, and that is being a person with a disability. But hey, let's own it. Let's talk about it. Let's have a discussion, and let's connect as human beings. Dylan, bring us home.
Well, thank you. I think the so many great points by Chris and Kate. From my experiences, just so you guys know, I self-identify as being deaf and hard of hearing. So I'm looking at captions on the screen, but I also am a person with physical disabilities, and I have learning disabilities. So I have a minor case of OCD, and I also have some learning differences. But those are non-apparent disabilities. A lot of people make assumptions based on, hey, you're a perfectly normal speaking kind of guy. You know how to speak well, but in sense that, there's a lot of assumptions. And so that's one thing. Another thing is we need to work toward intentional inclusion. And so intentional inclusion is curiosity. You have a curiosity to want to be a part of something, or if you don't know something, ask the question. And sometimes instead of speaking out, how about bring them in and just speak to them one-on-one? I think there's a lot of different challenges there in regards to that. But I think the best case scenario is strive for intentional inclusion. Make sure that you're building that relationship and letting them know that, hey, we have a safe space where we welcome your feedback. We welcome your input. And if there's any problem, come to me directly. And I think that is important to see that assurance that companies or individuals or even higher up leadership, they're welcoming them in the room, letting them know that you can trust me. I may not know everything, but I can be open to listen and understand. And if I can be of any assistance, how could I better assist you? So I think there's challenges. There's a lot of assumptions in this world, but I think we need to be better and open and expressing ourselves. And empathy is great, but I also think it's important to express, because if we don't know something, speak up, but speak it in a way that is safe for everyone, but not only for the hiring person, but also or a supervisor, but also to the employee, whether you have a disability or not.
Thank you, Dylan. That's fantastic. And also, I really want to underline the point right there that what I often tell employers is that curiosity is not the problem. Yes, we can make some huge blunders with how we ask the question, or when we ask the question, or even like the subject, the way that we bring it up. But there's not a whole lot that's inherently wrong with being curious. And a lot of times, as a person with a disability, people ask me myself about, hey, what's it like to have hearing loss? And I will talk with them about it. I like to share that. But there's also a lot of things about disability that I don't know. And you have to talk to somebody that has that particular disability. And sometimes they, depending on your trust level with them, they will be happy to share their lived experience. So I was talking with a coworker the other day, about what it's like to live with diabetes. He was able to share a lot of things, and it was very eye-opening for me. And I was talking with another coworker, hey, so I know this sounds like an ignorant question, but how do you drive a car if you use a wheelchair? And I didn't know. I honestly didn't know, but it was something that was really valuable for me to ask that question once I'd kind of gotten to a position of trust and then engage with them. So that brings us to our next topic. And Chris, I'm going to have you start this one off here. What does disability etiquette mean to you?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to share with you my response to that. Simply put, disability etiquette to me is treating people with disabilities just like you would treat anyone else. Many businesses will praise you if you treat each customer like they are the most important person in your life. And that's the way I try to treat everyone, and I want everyone to treat me. Not because I'm arrogant, but because of the fact that we should all be very kind and caring and compassionate. Treat people with respect, have integrity, um, be considerate for them and to them. And to what our Miles was saying, I was going to say our host, but I remember your name. I'm horrible with names. Was saying about walking on eggshells and being careful about what we say, asking questions. I'm sure that may have been difficult. Asking someone, what is it like to live with diabetes? That's not going to be that hard to answer because most people have had a life before diabetes and now after, and they can give you a good answer. But you ask somebody like me, what's it like to be visually impaired? I can't answer that because of the fact that I've been visually impaired since birth. To me, it's normal. I mean, there's no way of doing that, of explaining it to you in a way that you have context until you have been visually impaired like myself. But asking questions is great, but you want to make sure your tone of voice has curiosity in it, not condescending, like, well, what's it like to be disabled? Like you're looking down upon them. You want to ask it with a tone of curiosity. Otherwise, you put the other person on the defense, and you don't want to do that because that's going to alienate them and cause problems, and it's not going to make an inclusive environment. So we need to treat everyone with respect and courtesy, whether they're disabled or not. And by doing that and getting the habit of doing that with others, we do it with the disabled community, businesses and employees do that with the disabled community. We're going to just kind of build that inclusive world that we're all wanting, that we mentioned earlier. It does not happen overnight. It takes time. It's a continuous journey. So my definition in short term of disability etiquette: be a good human. Just try to be kind to each other and respectful.
Thank you, Chris. And I think that what I would add too is that, hey, this stuff is complicated, right? It's not something that we can boil down into a quick sentence, a quick soundbite, right? This is something that's complicated. This is something that's very human and empathetic at its base. And it's something that we're not all going to get perfect either. Kate, how about you? What about disability etiquette?
Yeah, as I was listening to Dave talk or Chris talk, I was thinking of a couple of things. The intentional inclusion part really stands out. And so 3 things I'm thinking are being, just accommodating, accepting, and acknowledged. I don't think it, like I said, it doesn't need to be put out there. And so we just want to be treated like everybody else. And so I suspect some people are probably trying to toggle, how do you acknowledge someone's disability while also just accepting, for who they are and not drawing attention to it. And so, being intentional with including people in the work environment and being, emotionally sensitive is just, again, it doesn't need to be complicated, basically. Accommodating, acknowledged, and acceptance are the 3 things that we're asking for. And so, depending on whether it's a physical disability that, where there's our physical access barriers for people, it's very easy to say, hey, let me, you can ask to hold the door for somebody, but other people don't want the door held for them, and they're capable of doing it because they don't want to be seen as weak or less than. And so again, going back to what we were saying earlier, is it's just a matter of having a conversation and, honing in onto your emotional intelligence and anticipating, what people may need or not need.
I hope you all on the call are taking some good notes right here. Some really, really good points there. And I wanted to direct the question over to you, Dylan, particularly if you wouldn't mind sharing from your experience as a hard of hearing individual. I was talking with one of the folks in my network the other day, and she was explaining to me that she was in the grocery store, and a lady very casually says to her, she's asking if she wants to, if she's using that shopping cart, and she asked like 3 times, and then finally she says, "Are you deaf? You know, are you deaf? Or, you know, can I use that shopping cart?" And of course, that was a moment for self-reflection, I'm sure, for that person, because when she responded, "Yes, I am actually deaf." But could you actually share from your own perspective, like what etiquette is, and especially like how some of this ableist language might be baked right into the very infrastructure of our language?
Well, thank you for referencing that. I think for me, the challenge is with etiquette. We also have to keep in mind it's not those that without disabilities need etiquette around people with disabilities. It's also people with disabilities also need to have etiquette with other people with disabilities. And so there's a challenge. So it's a working progress for all of us. Each of us is learning in our own right because we all identify differently. And so I think the importance by this is, for me personally, I've been called out for saying the wrong things and interpret it wrong. And you know what? As long as we accept it and recognize it and accept it and acknowledge that, hey, I can do better, I can be better in doing this kind of things. But the etiquette, disability etiquette in general, the challenge there is how do you create an environment that is accepting without even harming anybody and so forth. And it's all about communication. It's all how, and sometimes it takes that confronted moment with somebody to be able to learn and understand disability etiquette for that person or for that community that you represent. So I think the challenge here is understanding how to your surroundings, knowing each person. Don't speak on their behalf. Allow them to speak for themselves. And most importantly, disability etiquette is an opportunity to understand, to learn, to listen, but also the disability etiquette can be a good thing and a bad thing. I think the challenge for me is, I'm always providing education and being aware of it. But also, disability etiquette is an opportunity to understand each person's disabilities and how they prefer to communicate. Because for me, deaf and hard of hearing is a total different culture for those that are part of the physical disability community. So, and that's also the same for those that are visually impaired or blind. So it just depends on what that culture is. And I'll be honest with you, Miles, being deaf and hard of hearing, I don't even know or understand my own deaf culture. I'm not around that every day. There are some people that are around it and they live it every day. For me, I don't. I work with people from all backgrounds and walks of life, most of them without disabilities. So I'm normal to that occasion. So I think it's important that when you think of disability etiquette, think of it as an opportunity to learn, to be informed, but also it's okay to be confronted by somebody. Take it as an opportunity to work towards making progress and how you communicate and connect with people with disabilities.
Thank you, Dylan. I couldn't agree more, especially with your point that, hey, a person with a disability may not necessarily be an expert in everything disabilities. You're going to have to talk to lots and lots of different people to kind of get a full scope. And I mean, to share personally with y'all, I remember my biggest learning moment that I had. It was my second week at Peak Performers. And I was at a job fair, and I had probably talked to 300 people that day. And finally, there was this one gentleman that was hanging out in the back of the crowd. He was kind of waiting to talk to me until everybody else had cleared out. And he comes up very sheepishly to the table and he says, "Hey, Miles, so I have heard that alcoholism is somebody that is a recovering addict is a protected person under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So would I qualify for Peak Performers?" And I regret this every day that I said, "No, I don't think it is." And he walked away. And I wish I could take those words back. And the reason that I share that is that I came back to the office. I was having conversations with my coworkers, and they corrected me, and they were able to say, actually, somebody that is recovering from alcoholism, that is a protected condition under the Americans with Disabilities Act that we need to be very cognizant of. And I wish I could take that back. I really wish I could help that gentleman find a job right now. To be honest with you, that's something that really matters to me. But it's got me thinking a lot about the fact that we all have biases. It's one of those things that if you have a bias, that doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. It just means that you have some room to grow. You have some room to develop as well. And I know that I do. I actually came from my biological grandfather died from alcoholism, and so we've always had a very big stigma in our family against alcoholism in general, just because that was such a traumatic event for our family going backwards in time. So having said that, this is my long-winded way of sharing a story, but also telling y'all, I wanted to ask, what is the difference between bias and discrimination in your opinion? And if you wouldn't mind, let's go ahead and start with Dylan on this one.
Miles, you want me to ask the tough questions on this one? Okay, so bias and discrimination. Okay, bias is from now. This is my perspective. Not everybody will agree with me, and I think and that's the point of this call, because we all have different perspectives. So bias, I think, is oftentimes how we interpret. We might show it non-verbally or verbally. So it just depends how we express it. We might have judgments, preconceived judgments, and not necessarily, but discrimination is more of an action. So discrimination is the idea of preventing or not allowing someone to be able to, for example, sit at the table. For example, not sit at the table. I think it's more like, preventing access to something that is public. So if a public meeting is happening and they're not able to access it, let's say for your local governments, and you're not providing if it's a preliminary or if there's an open meeting, you have to provide members of the public to attend. You have to give them access. In some way is, discrimination or something. And so another discrimination would be something in the workplace. It is it's the act of basically, somebody just said discrimination is acting on your biases. Yes, in a way, that's essentially true. Bias is just the thought process in what we think and so forth, whereas discrimination is the action. So whoever said that, JB, I think it is, great job. You kind of answered my question.
I appreciate y'all in the chat there participating. So thank y'all. I appreciate it. And Kate, would you mind adding to this as well?
Yeah, I think, bias versus discrimination. So for bias, that would have to be a perception. And you can, basically have many perceptions about many things, whether it's right or wrong. Usually perceptions are opinion-based. And so it's when you actually act on that perception, and withhold resources, access to, software programs needed to do a job, creating barriers because of a perceived bias towards somebody in this conversation and their disability, apparent or not. And so unfortunately I have faced, the discrimination side of things. And so, again, it's so disappointing because it's very easy to confront and to tackle just by simply having a conversation. If there is confusion about how to meet the needs of somebody who's different, oh my gosh, than you. So yeah, that's a really good question, Miles. I'm glad you asked that so people can understand the difference of when does it cross the line of, EEOC and ADA conduct, infringing on that type of conduct.
Oh my God, Kate, are you telling me that you're different than me? Is that what you're indicating to me? This is totally incomprehensible to me. Chris, I mean, are you different than me too? What's going on here?
I thought we are all the same. Actually, I know I'm different. I'm unique. I claim that with pride that I'm a very unique person and a unique views on life. But getting back to your question, I agree with Dylan and Kate. Biases are our opinions, our beliefs. Where do those biases come from? I want to take a step backwards to answer that. Stereotypes. Stereotypes, I believe, fuel our biases, and then our biases become what we believe, which leads us to become discrimination, or leads us into discriminating acts. What I think is the biggest cause of this is labels. I have a saying that I love saying, I believe, labels belong on soup cans, they don't belong on me. As labels belong on soup cans, they don't belong on me. I hate labels. I see people use labels constantly for two reasons. They want to use it to make themselves feel better and or to put somebody else down. And unfortunately, that happens in our community by people in our own community, by people who are not in our community, by people who are able-bodied. And we see it in other cultures too. We see it in race issues. We see it in sexual orientation issues. We see it everywhere where we would like to see inclusivity. We see people use labels to empower them by putting down other people. We got to quit using labels. They are horrible. They're hurting all of us. And the way that we do this is we can make changes within our businesses, our companies. One way that I know of is ERGs, Employment Resource Groups. And I will be talking about that a little bit later in this interview because I know another question that's coming up that's going to be asked directly to me. But these are a great way to start. But to get a company to rid that business of biases, or at least minimize it, because you may never be able to get rid of it. Get rid of the biases, get rid of the discrimination. It's got to start up at the top level, because everything trickles down from higher management through the company, the culture, the beliefs. And we got to get upper management to believe that. ERGs are great. That gets it into the system, but we got to get it up. And when we, as people in the disabled community, interact with a non-disabled person and somebody opens the door, I think Dylan was talking about this, I'm not sure, maybe Kate, people react to it. Some are like, oh, thank you. And others are like, I could do that on my own. I get people opening doors for me all the time because I use a scooter. I'm also physically disabled. And half the time I'm not going through that door, but I always stop and thank them. By me doing that, I don't know what that person does for a living. What if that person's in a hiring position? What if that person is in management? I just show them a demonstration of how courteous and how respectful people in the disabled community are. And that may change their mind in hiring people or change that culture. So in the disabled community, we have to make changes, and we want to start the changes there, and hopefully that kicks in and spreads throughout an entire company. Every interaction we have a chance to make a difference, whether we're disabled or able-bodied, to make inclusion work in all aspects of our life, both in our work and personal life.
Chris, so many good points right there. Two that I would comment on. First off, Chris himself has really done a very positive label with his hashtag define yourself, and also successful and disabled. It's something that I really admire about your podcast, because it is helping transition those labels and the way that we might think of other people. So Chris, thank you for your work there. And just to plug Chris again too, if you haven't listened to his podcast, go download it. It's free. You know, what are you waiting for? You need to download that right now. The other thing that I would point out too, and kind of add to what you're saying, is that as leaders, we can't delegate this necessarily. You know, it starts with us. This inclusion starts with us. But also, if you are a leader at an organization and you have a disability, maybe it's time for you to come forward and enable other people within your organization by coming forward and saying, hey, look, I self-identify as having this disability. it all starts at the top with a lot of that leadership, and then a lot of the boots on the ground happens with the one-on-one conversations. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And we're going to go to the rapid fire round, where I ask each of you an individual question to bring it home. And Chris, we're going to start off with you, just because you kind of teased that a little bit before. You got to stop stealing my script, man. I don't appreciate.
Don't send it to me in the email.
So, yeah, Chris, would you mind kind of sharing your thoughts on ERGs?
On ERGs, well, the actual question that had to do with my podcast, which ties in with the ERG. What interesting conversation did I have on a podcast, my Successful and Disabled podcast, available on podcast player platforms and on YouTube as well. The interesting conversation I had was with a gentleman from the Red Cross. He is a senior director within the Red Cross, and he's also visually impaired. And we talked about ERG groups and how he started them and how that's making a change within the company, and how that is helping people who are disabled have a voice and make changes what is more inclusive within the Red Cross. I'm not getting paid by the Red Cross to say this, but that was on the interview. The thing that I learned from that was the Red Cross is looking for volunteers, and they want to include disabled people. They're welcome to disabled people. The problem I see is they don't say that in any of the messaging. So we're kind of clueless that, oh, wow, they want to have volunteers, but can I do that? Will they welcome me? Will I be discriminated? Which I kind of mentioned earlier today. Employers, and whether it be employers or organizations looking for volunteers, need to set that tone when they do outreach. They're welcoming to the disabled community, and this is one of the things that needs to be done, so people in the disabled community feel this is a safe place to work. I know in many communities, people are now sharing their pronouns to signify that it's an inclusive or safe place for people who have different sexual orientations. We need to start doing that in the disabled community. Employers should do that too, with saying, we welcome people with disabilities. We have accommodations available during that recruiting time, because there's an untapped resource out there called the disabled community. They're ready, willing to work, and they can bring a perspective to your business you never thought of, and you can better serve your customers.
Wow. I mean, again, take notes, y'all. This is a lot of really great ideas right here for how we can help change it and move the buck forward, because it's time. It's time that we really have a more inclusive environment. And speaking of which, Kate, I wanted to ask you, given your background within organizational development, I was kind of curious, what kinds of training around disability inclusion were you exposed to in more formalized environment? And I guess, what would you have changed in this material?
That's a good question. So my background, so I'm formerly worked in human resources, but I'm transitioning into organizational development. I'm actually in State College right now, attending one of my courses in person for my master's program. And so it's an exciting time. And so for me, like in terms of the previous training beyond my degree program, to be honest, in organizational leadership is really like because I minored in labor and employee relations, that's where I learned about a lot of these federal laws. And so what I'm finding is a lot of people accidentally fall into human resources. And so they're probably not getting that training, is what I'm finding, which I think is how we're having all these issues in the workplace, to be honest with you. And so that's, for me, is only because of my training was why those radars were going up for me, and the yellow flags of like, something just doesn't seem to be right. And so I really feel like an armchair expert with all the research I've been doing within the last year, more on labor law, employee law. But coming in from the OD standpoint, my intentions are basically taking it a step higher and really getting into the meats and guts of an organization and improving their culture. What I intend on doing is, when they invite me in, is I'm going to be having an assessment for them to complete that basically does a pulse check for them. And it basically tests their DE&I efforts and puts it to the test, and being like, are you doing this just to check a box, or is this actually part of your culture? And is this natural for people to feel integrated and welcomed and accommodated in their work environments? And hopefully, this won't be it's not intentional to put them, in a negative spotlight, but it's really just intentional to help them do better if they can do better. And I think everybody has room to improve. And so people who are open-minded and willing to be humble, being like, the last 2 years, we really are trying to drive home our DE&I efforts, but we may be missing the mark in some areas. And so that's where I come in, hoping, to work with their teams and to be able to cover bases that may not have been tapped into.
And for those of you that are on the call right now, sometimes it really can help to have an outsider come into your organization that's going to have a fresh pair of eyes. That's somebody that's going to be able to level with you, and somebody that doesn't have the history with the organization or the preconceptions of, well, we do it this way because that's the way we've always done it. So yeah, reach out to Kate, reach out to one of the other fine panelists, reach out to other folks within the community to find a consultant who is able to help you. And Dylan, would you mind finishing us off here, sir? I guess the question that I have for you is that you are the man about town. You kind of know everybody who is everybody within the disability community and also within the political community. And I admire about you greatly. So I guess I would ask that if you were sitting down with any particular leader at the federal or at the state level, like who would you sit down with and what conversation would you have with them and what would you hope to change their mind on?
Well, I appreciate the question, Miles. I think the important thing for everyone to know is that at the federal level and the state level and the local level, it varies differently. So at a federal level, the biggest thing I would think about is I would work with the Vice President of the United States and say, you know what, we need to figure out a way to remove, and unfortunately not everybody's going to agree with this, remove the sub-minimum wage. I think that those shelter workshops, I'm sorry, but I feel like all people with disabilities have the capable independence, and sub-minimum wage does not give them that independence. And so that's just my thought on a federal level. On the state level, I think one thing that we're missing here is the access to community-based options. And people are waiting for waivers on a wait list of more than 100,000 people on a wait list, and they're still waiting to get access to funding for services. So that's at the state level. At a local level, one thing that I'm pushing forward is making sure that people with disabilities have a seat at every board and commission within the local governments. Problem is, local cities in Texas, and I'm going to call them out, say it like how it is that many think they know it all and they think they have the answers. Unfortunately, not everybody has the access to connect with the city officials. And so for me, it's the relationship component. You got to know who it is, where they get involved, and who's the decision-making authority, and what can you do to be a better ally and a better voice, but also make sure that there's issues that you're trying to speak to relates to in their community, their demographics, their issues that they're addressing for that specific community. So at this federal level, talk about to the VP, to the office of the governor, I would be focusing on, how do we improve community-based options and really focus on providing access to everyone. Yes, it's a big funding problem, and then I think that is something that we need to address. And at the local level, we need to make sure that there's representation, because sometimes people are unaware that they're making assumptions and they're making a vote or recommendation to city councils based on our community when they don't really have the understanding or expertise on experience at living the life of people with disabilities. So that right there is what I have to say from a policy standpoint. And I encourage all of you to have a proactive voice. Be proactive. Don't be reactive. Be proactive. Build that relationship with your network, and ultimately find areas that you are passionate about, because that is what ultimately you have a better voice being in an issue that you care about. Thank you.
Dylan, I really admire what you're doing. And let me reinforce what he said right there. There's a bit of a hashtag going around right now that's nothing about us without us. And I think that that is really kind of applicable right here. It's important that you have people with disabilities at every level in the organization. And hey, guess what? You already do. To be honest with you, it's estimated that 26% of all prime age working adults, and that's just a technical term for 26 to 65, have a disability of some kind, and yet only 3% of them ever self-disclose. And realistically, that number is probably an undercount when you actually consider the full scope of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you need to be thinking as an organization, not only how do I hire more people with disabilities, but how do I make a more inclusive environment and bring people to where they're comfortable disclosing in my own workplace, because I guarantee you already have them and they are happy to share with you. Well, they might be happy to share with you exactly what their thoughts and feelings are, and try to make it a better workplace for all. I'm afraid that is about all the time that we have. I want to thank everybody for joining in. Just a quick pitch right here. If you are interested, first off, you can connect with any of us, Dylan, Kate, or Chris. Our LinkedIn profiles are in the description for the event. So please connect with us. And if you do have additional questions, we are all here and happy to help. The other thing that I would say too is that if you are a business and you are interested in actually making changes and you want to have a peer network to fall back on, I encourage you to get involved with Disability In. There are local chapters nearby you. There's also a large national organization if you are with a Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 company. And the final bit too is, hey, I'm Miles. I'm with Peak Performers. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm here to be a support network for you as you eventually hire and ultimately make your place more inclusive to people with disabilities. Aaron, back to you, sir.
Thank you, Miles, for moderating an awesome session, bringing us in right on time as well. Dylan, Kate, Chris, thank you very much for your insights as people with disabilities, as folks that have worked with businesses from a broad range. And I'll just finish with kind of echoing something Miles said, which is, as a business, as an organization, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, government, whatever, disability inclusion is a journey, and no matter where you are in that journey, there's always something that you can share with others on some of the sometimes tough lessons learned, sometimes some of the wins that you have, but also there's things to always be learning. So we can do that in a space where organizations that have a commitment to disability inclusion can join, and that's Disability In Central Texas as a local affiliate, and then Disability In as a national and international organization. So thank you for everybody who joined us today and your time. I'm sure everybody learned something. Look forward to our next event, and we hope to put on something at least as good as this. That'll be a tough challenge, but this was awesome, and appreciate everybody. Have a good rest of your Friday.
Bye,
Thanks for
everybody.
the opportunity to talk about this.
And thank you for inviting me.
Thanks everyone who joined. Have a good day.